In the early 90s, amidst a landscape dotted with nuclear reactors and shadowed by the Cold War, a quiet nuclear scare rippled through America. But the source wasn't a meltdown or a Soviet threat. It was a teenager. His name was David Hahn, and he became known as the radioactive Boy Scout. Now let me be clear, this isn't some cold case we're revisiting. We're talking about events so recent they almost sound like fiction. This is a story of how a normal-looking kid from a normal-looking town managed to build an illegal nuclear reactor in his backyard. And the scariest part is, he did all of this before he turned 18. So let us dive in and uncover what drove him to do it, and why his story still matters today. We tend to think of geniuses as flamboyant, or at least memorable. Someone like Stephen Hawking with his booming voice and sharp wit, or Bill Gates with his nerdy charm. But in reality, geniuses come in all packages. David Hahn didn't look like your typical nuclear physicist. In fact, he looked pretty unremarkable. He was thin, soft-spoken, and the kind of person who might have easily blended into the background. He was just another kid, growing up in a typical American town. But don't be fooled by his appearance. David had a mind that was anything but ordinary. Like many kids, David had always been interested in how things work. As a child, he took things apart and put them back together again. But unlike most children, his curiosity didn't stop at taking things apart. It went deeper, much deeper. It led him to question the very core of our existence. He wanted to know what made the stars shine and the sun warm our planet. He was fascinated by nuclear energy, the power that drives the universe. Now, you might say it's a strange interest for a kid, but for David, it was just the beginning. He was born on December 27, 1974, in Royal Oak, Michigan. Life was relatively normal for the first few years. He had a father who worked as a barber and a mother who was a secretary. But like all families, they weren't perfect. His parents divorced when he was 8. His father moved out and David stayed with his mother. Then in 1983, his mom married again. She married a man named John Katsamatas, who would become David's stepfather. Maybe because of the change in family structure, or maybe because of something within him, David began acting out. He got into fights, skipped school, and developed habits that worried his parents. By the time he was 13, he'd even dropped out of school, so his stepfather suggested he join the Boy Scouts, hoping it would help David channel his energy into something more productive. But David had different plans. While flipping through the merit badge book, he stumbled upon something that immediately caught his eye. The Nuclear Energy Merit Badge. It was just a small entry with a cartoon atom and a brief description of atomic power. But for David, it was a calling. He saw the badge not as a childhood reward, but as a challenge. It set him on a path that would take him from a curious Boy Scout to a young man who built an illegal nuclear reactor in his backyard. There's this common misconception that geniuses are born that way. There's no explaining how they get their ideas or how they develop their interests, but that's not true. David Hahn was a self-made genius. He honed his skills through sheer determination and hard work. He read books, took courses, and conducted experiments on his own. But his dedication wasn't motivated by fame or fortune. It was pure, unadulterated curiosity. He just wanted to understand how things work. David's journey into nuclear energy began with a simple question. How do I get a nuclear energy badge? The answer involved acquiring a certain amount of radioactive materials, which led him to write letters to various government agencies and companies requesting samples. To his surprise, he received them. Why? Because he posed as a science teacher needing materials for a class project. These materials included americium from smoke detectors, thorium from lantern mantles, radium from old clocks, and polonium from static brushes. Each small sample brought him closer to his goal. It was 1991, and the internet was still in its infancy. So David relied on traditional methods to obtain his materials. He used libraries, mail-order catalogs, and even classified ads. He scoured through old physics textbooks and manuals looking for any information he could find on building a nuclear reactor. Armed with this knowledge and his collection of radioactive materials, he began his construction. He chose a place for his lab that seemed like an unlikely spot for such a dangerous project, the backyard of his mother's house. He converted a small weather-beaten shed into his workspace. It was hardly impressive. Just a 6 by 6 foot wooden box with a rusted lock and peeling paint. But inside, it was a hive of activity. He lined the walls with makeshift shielding, stored his materials in labeled containers, and monitored his progress with a Geiger counter. The shed became his sanctuary, a place where he could pursue his passion without interference. The construction of his reactor was slow and methodical. He experimented with different materials and designs, carefully recording his results. He created a device that could produce a chain reaction, but it wasn't stable. It didn't produce the sustained reaction needed for a true reactor. Undeterred, he continued his work. He crushed and extracted radioactive dust from common household items, constantly refining his technique. Finally, after months of work, his reactor began to tick. His Geiger counter clicked rapidly, indicating high levels of radiation. He'd successfully built a crude nuclear reactor. Think about the audacity of this. A teenager had built a reactor without any formal training in nuclear engineering. All he had was his obsession and a shed in his backyard. Now, you might wonder, why didn't he share his discovery with the world? Why keep it a secret? Well, it's natural to think that someone as passionate as David would want to share their work with others. But remember, David wasn't motivated by fame. He was motivated by understanding. He was afraid of what might happen if people knew what he'd done. So he tried to dismantle his reactor and hide the remains across town. But his efforts were in vain. The contamination had spread. On July 1992, while trying to buy more smoke detectors, David was stopped by the police. They found odd equipment, handwritten notes, and materials they couldn't explain. When they saw the radiation symbols, they called in the experts. Soon, the entire town was buzzing with rumors. What had happened to the quiet kid from down the street? How did he become the radioactive Boy Scout? The investigation was swift and intense. The EPA, the NRC, and the FBI descended on his home. Hazmat teams sealed off his shed and analyzed the soil. His reactor was dismantled. It's placed in barrels and sent to a secure nuclear waste facility in Utah. Meanwhile, David's life turned upside down. People pointed fingers, whispering theories about his motives. Some saw him as a misunderstood genius. Others saw him as a reckless hazard. The media picked up the story, and soon David was a national sensation. But despite all the attention, David remained quiet. He never gave interviews. He never explained his actions. He just disappeared. For a while, he tried to move on with his life. He considered going to college, but ultimately dropped out. He joined the Navy, but didn't last long. He struggled with alcohol abuse and depression. In 2016, at the age of 39, he was found dead in a Michigan hotel room. The cause of death was an accidental overdose. What was David thinking? Why did he do what he did? Was he a troubled kid who'd gone too far? Or was he a misunderstood genius whose passion had consumed him? The truth is, we may never know. David's story is a reminder that brilliance can come from the most unexpected places. It doesn't need to be flashy or over the top. Sometimes it just needs to be curious. David's story also reminds us of the importance of understanding. Sometimes what appears to be madness is just a mind that doesn't fit into our societal norms. We may not always understand brilliance, but we should strive to respect it. Today, the site of David's reactor is a mystery. No one knows exactly where it was or what happened to the shed. It's as if his entire project was erased from existence. But the story lives on. It's a testament to the power of curiosity and the potential that lies within us all. If you enjoyed this video, please stay tuned for more updates on our channel. Thank you for watching.